She drank cold water every day as if it were a meal, even though she knew it wouldn't ease her hunger. It was simply a habit she had developed since childhood. She was always the last to wake up, the last to eat, because no one reminded her. By the time she arrived at the cafeteria, the others had already finished their meals. But it wasn't that she wanted to be like this. She had lived an invisible existence since she was 3 years old. Originally, she had gone out with her classmates to make friends, but when the event ended, she was the only one forgotten. After that, she was sent to an orphanage. Her parents never came back for her, as if they had completely forgotten he existed. And so, she stayed in the orphanage. At 15, the orphanage finally allowed her to attend school and even arranged daily transportation for her. A girl who had never received any attention in her life suddenly found herself noticed, but in a different way. The orphanage covered her tuition, but she had to figure out how to pay for her meals. Without proper identification, even finding a job was difficult. Fortunately, the orphanage found her a well-paying job. She only had to pick up medicine from the hospital and deliver it to a designated person. Where the medicine went, she had no idea. Day after day, she thought this was how her life would always be. But fate took a turn, all because of a single sentence from a street thug. If those words had come from a rich person, she would have dismissed them as a joke. But hearing them from someone just like he, struggling at the bottom of society, made her wake up. For the first time, beyond her daily routine, she began spending her nights studying tirelessly in the dormitory. At first, she didn't understand why she was doing it, but soon, her efforts paid off. She ranked in the top 15 on a mock exam. The orphanage's attitude toward her changed completely. Not only did they provide her with the best study environment, but even those who had once treated her coldly started preparing meals for her. From that day on, she seemed to have found a new way to live. She wondered, if she became the top student in the entire school, what would happen then? She threw herself into relentless studying, fueled by stimulant-like brain-enhancing drugs. In the end, she not only took first place but also earned a scholarship. Strangely, those who had once bullied her now avoided her altogether, turning their attention to someone else. It was at this moment that the orphanage informed her that she could leave. It turned out that the family she had never met had finally found her. They had even secured her a place at the best girls' high school in Seoul, but they hadn't told her their address. So, she had no choice but to go to Seoul on her own. After arriving at the school, she found her way to the teachers, who were puzzled as to why she didn't have a parent accompanying her. She didn't explain, simply stating that she was a transfer student. Once her identity was confirmed, she was quickly assigned a class and a classroom. Unfamiliar with her surroundings, she stumbled her way to the entrance ceremony, where she overheard the student representative mention that a well-known teacher at the school had recently passed away, prompting a moment of silence. What she didn't realize at the time was that the deceased teacher was actually her father. Mistaken for an outsider, the security guard even forced her out of the event. Wandering aimlessly around campus, she eventually found her classroom, where the homeroom teacher scolded her for being late and told her to find an empty seat. However, when another transfer student arrived late, the teacher's attitude was completely different, smiling warmly instead of reprimanding. The classmates, too, seemed excited about this new arrival, making it clear that this girl had a special status. The teacher allowed her to choose any seat, and judging by the reaction of the students, everyone wanted her to sit beside them. Just then, a sudden noise interrupted the moment. Her suitcase had burst open from being overpacked. While embarrassing, this small incident unexpectedly caught the attention of the transfer girl, who chose to sit beside her. However, her worries soon came true. Later that day, some classmates cornered her in the restroom, demanding she switch seats. They warned her that if she refused, she wouldn't be allowed to leave. But before things escalated, the transfer girl suddenly appeared, grabbed her hand, and led her out. It was only then that she realized everyone seemed afraid of this girl. As they walked away, she saw the students quickly stepping aside to avoid her. Later, while eating, she noticed the girl had no drink, so she kindly offered her a bottle of water. To her surprise, the girl didn't take it. Instead, she poured it out right in front of her. Confused by this hostility, she couldn't understand why the girl would misunderstand her intentions. The girl then warned her, those chosen as the class joke never have a normal life. And now it was her turn. Most people might have brushed off such a remark, but she couldn't ignore it. She had noticed 3 deep scars on the girl's wrist. Though she didn't fully understand the story behind them, her own past experiences with bullying made her extra cautious. Previously, the class had tried to integrate her into their small social circles, but she was just a girl from a small town. No background, no wealth. In contrast, those around the transfer girl were either top students or came from influential families. She had assumed they got along because they were both transfer students. But after learning more, she realized this girl wasn't new at all. She was, in fact, the most famous student in the entire school. Not only was she strikingly beautiful, but she also ranked first in academics. What baffled her even more was that, despite only arriving that day, the girl already knew her name, something she hadn't told anyone. It turned out the girl had found her keychain, mistakenly thinking she was planning to apply to Korea University. She denied it, brushing it off, but the girl was serious about that goal, having private tutors and attending numerous prep classes. Their difference in status was like night and day. Becoming friends with this girl might be beneficial, but it also came with immense pressure. Feeling uneasy, she quietly switched seats with another student. But when the girl arrived in class, she demanded to switch again, insisting on sitting next to her. The entire class was shocked. No one had ever dared refuse this girl before. Yet, she didn't seem angry and simply accepted the situation. Soon after, the person who had helped with her school admission provided her with an address. Thinking she was finally returning home, she went there, only to find a strange woman answering the door. That was when she learned the truth. Her mother had passed away the year she went missing, and her father had also recently died. She was now completely alone. Just then, her stepmother reached out to her. She had assumed it was to bring her home for her father's funeral. Her stepmother questioned her about her father's belongings, and it was only then that she realized the true reason behind the sudden concern. Her stepmother wanted his phone. Only direct family members could retrieve it from the police station. However, she lied, claiming she hadn't found the phone among his belongings. She wanted to see for herself what secrets it might hold. When she finally got her hands on the phone, she tried multiple passwords but failed every time. Then, suddenly, an unknown number called. She answered, but there was only silence on the other end. It felt as if the caller was merely testing whether the phone was still active. The next day at school, a classmate who had been friendly to her just the day before suddenly spilled milk tea all over her uniform. At first, she thought it was an accident, but then the student blocked her path, sneering that her clothes had a strange smell. Turning around, she saw the entire class staring at her with mocking expressions. The uniform had been one she bought online the previous night because the teacher had criticized her for not wearing one. The seller had given her vague directions, making her wander around a narrow alley before finally reaching the pickup spot, where a wealthy young man in a luxury car handed her the uniform from an underground garage. Even then, she had felt something was off, but she had no other options. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching her from the shadows, secretly recording everything. After the milk tea incident, she went to a laundromat and scrubbed the uniform multiple times. Yet, when she returned to school the next day, someone still found an excuse to target her. The whole situation reminded her of the bullying she had suffered at her previous school, but once again, she felt powerless to fight back. Quietly, she took her stained clothes to the restroom to clean them. Just then, the transfer girl named Yuri appeared with a fresh set of clothes, as if she had anticipated this. This only deepened her suspicion. Was Yuri behind everything? Was this all punishment for switching seats? She refused the offer, but instead of being annoyed, Yuri seemed thrilled, as if she enjoyed the resistance. Returning to class, she was greeted with the first mock exam. The teacher handed out the test papers and announced that they had only 20 minutes to complete it. But as she looked at the questions, she realized they were far beyond their grade level. Yet, her classmates calmly began writing, as if they had seen the questions before. She started to suspect that they had already studied this material in a tutoring program. After the exam, the teacher announced the passing scores, but her name wasn't on the list. She chased after the teacher, desperate to know her score, only to be met with sarcasm. She had once expected great things from her after hearing she had ranked first at her previous school, but now she couldn't even pass. She even implied that her past achievements had been the result of cheating. To make matters worse, She hinted that all the test questions had been covered in an elite tutoring program, one that the school did not officially teach. But how could she afford to attend something like that? Later, she overheard whispers in the hallway. As she approached, she saw students glancing at their phones and laughing. She snatched a girl's phone and saw the screen, photos of her washing her uniform in the restroom. Someone had been waiting for her, secretly taking pictures, and spreading false rumors online. Not long after, she received a mysterious message with information about the tutoring program. Looking around, she saw no one nearby. The program had somehow predicted every single test question. Curious but unable to afford it, she decided to investigate. But when she inquired about the fees, she realized it was impossible. She couldn't even afford it on an installment plan. As she was leaving, she heard a lecture coming from one of the classrooms. Thinking quickly, she pulled out her phone, planning to secretly record the session. But just as she started, the front desk receptionist caught her, forcing her to run. She managed to slip into an elevator, the doors opened, and standing there, waiting for her, was Yiri. Yiri placed her hat on her head and told her to hide on the rooftop for now, promising to notify her when it was safe to leave. Alone on the rooftop, she looked around. The environment felt eerily similar to a place where she had once been bullied. Fear gripped her as she covered her ears, trying to block out the memories. Suddenly, heavy rain began to fall. At that moment, a hand reached out to her, but she could no longer tell, was Yiri an angel here to save her, or a demon leading her into hell? Later, she took her to her father's old estate. In front of her father's subordinates, she played along, pretending to take their medication and undergo their tests, before secretly vomiting the pills back out. She had brought the girl there for a reason. A custom-made school uniform awaited her, tailored perfectly to her size. She had secretly measured her during their last encounter. She had even considered gifting her shoes but hesitated, fearing she might use them to run away. But this wasn't just about kindness. She wanted something in return. She wanted to know her secret, how she had managed to excel academically without the help of elite tutors. She offered a trade, the tutoring center's materials in exchange for her study methods. But she refused. She said her methods were useless here. Besides, she was the top student. Why would she need advice from someone else? Before she could think further, her two best friends suddenly arrived. She couldn't let them find out about her plan, so she hid the girl in a wardrobe. Outside, the two friends started gossiping, talking about the girl behind her back. To protect her, she covered the girl's ears. Just then, a message notification popped up on the girl's phone. The two friends turned toward the wardrobe, suspicious. But at the last second, she used another message alert to lure them downstairs. Afterward, she led the girl to safety. Unexpectedly, the girl gave her a small charm as a token of gratitude. Finally, she had made progress. That night, her father drove her home. Out of nowhere, he mentioned the girl. She panicked. She had deliberately arranged for the girl to fail a test, hoping to keep her off their father's radar. Because she knew, her father would eliminate anyone who posed a threat. But as she thought about it, she realized something strange. She hadn't seen her sister in a long time. Just yesterday, the entire class had laughed at her. But today, someone had suddenly given her a flower. Even the classmate who had poured milk tea on her had disappeared, missing for 3 days. When she asked the teacher, she found out that person's phone had been turned off. The classmates whispered among themselves, convinced that the recent transfer student had something to do with the sudden disappearance of someone in their class. After all, she had specifically requested to sit in that seat today, and her relationship with the class queen had suddenly become close. The rumors grew even more intense when, during the class president election, she was unexpectedly nominated by Yiri, even though the position had originally been reserved for Tuijian. The two had even agreed on it beforehand, but now that Yiri had recommended someone else, the teacher had no choice but to write both names on the board and let the students vote. To Tuijian's shock, the votes in favor of the newcomer were higher. Furious at losing the class president position, Tuijian stormed to the podium and flipped through the ballots, only to discover that all the ones with the winner's name were written in the exact same handwriting. It was clear someone had cheated. Yet, the teacher did not take her side and only made her vice president. Tuijian secretly took the voting slips home and scanned them, hoping to uncover more evidence. To her surprise, she discovered something unusual. the handwriting matched Yuri's own. Her anger deepened. Then, she noticed a nearby document, an old medical record belonging to Soljiai, the new transfer's father. The records claimed that Soljiai's father had been rushed to the hospital due to severe stomach pain, but he had died shortly after arrival. The attending doctor at the time? None other than Yuri's father. If Tuijian could dig up something incriminating, she could drive a wedge between Soljiai and Yuri. Meanwhile, Soljiai was still eagerly waiting for a date that never arrived. Thinking she had been stood up again, she wandered alone into an alleyway. Little did she know, Yuri had been watching her from above the entire time. Before long, Yuri approached her, playfully grabbing a microphone tube and starting to sing with her as if they were old friends. Soljiai, who had always been overlooked by everyone, felt seen for the first time in her life. Later, Yuri took Soljiai back to her house. Soljiai felt like prey being dragged into a hunter's den, her nerves on edge. Her eyes landed on the ocean-themed decorations on the walls, which led to a conversation about swimming. They even made plans to go together sometime. But the thought of swimming with Yuri made Soljiai blush. As if sensing this, Yuri suddenly started undressing right in front of her. Seeing Soljiai's flustered reaction, Yuri smirked and teased her. Was she imagining something inappropriate? But in the end, Yuri simply changed into sleepwear. Soljiai was left to sleep alone. But in her dreams, things played out very differently. She and Yuri were holding each other, growing even more intimate. The dream was so intense that she jolted awake. Unable to sleep, she got up to use the bathroom and accidentally spotted Yuri's phone lighting up. It was a message from the student who had bullied her before, pleading for mercy. Curiosity got the better of him, and she scrolled through the messages. They mentioned something about deleting a video. That was when it clicked. This was why that student hadn't shown up to school in days. Yuri had some kind of leverage over them. The next morning, Yuri woke up to find that the person who had been sleeping beside her was gone. She quickly checked the GPS tracker on her phone and sighed in relief. She had secretly installed a tracker on Soljiai's phone the night before. Today, she had prepared a special surprise for her. But when she arrived at school, Soljiai deliberately avoided her. Finding this odd, she followed her and eventually led her to the administrative office. There, the student who had previously bullied Soljiai was in the process of transferring schools. This was the surprise she had arranged for her. However, Soljiai didn't seem particularly happy about it. Later, in their literature class, Soljiai's essay received the highest score, even surpassing Yuri's. The teacher, out of respect for privacy, didn't reveal the contents of her essay, which only made the entire class even more curious. What had Soljiai written? Then, during lunch, her essay mysteriously went missing. No matter how much she searched, she couldn't find it. Even worse, someone had not only stolen it but also printed out copies and placed them in every classmate's desk. Furious, Yuri went around collecting all the printed copies and warned everyone not to read them. She seemed to already know what the essay contained. But Soljiai wasn't angry. Instead, she asked to speak with her privately. After all, the essay was about her own personal growth. If people knew about it, so be it. What she didn't understand was why Yuri seemed even more upset than she was. That was when she realized, on the night she had seen the desperate texts from the bullied student, she had also discovered something else. Yuri had been secretly collecting information on her for years, from childhood records to details about her father. She wanted to know, why had she done all of this? Soljiai had no idea that the information stored in Yuri's phone actually came from her father's safe. For a long time, Yuri's older sister had been absent from home. Her family told her that her sister had gone away to study elsewhere, but she never believed them. One night, she secretly opened her father's safe, hoping to find clues about her sister's whereabouts. Instead, she found Soljiai's personal records. On impulse, she took photos of the documents, unknowingly creating what Soljiai would later mistake as evidence of her spying on her. Meanwhile, Soljiai went home and recalled what the deputy class president had mentioned about her stepmother being involved in a legal battle. While searching the house, she stumbled upon a 5 billion insurance policy. Inside the document folder, she also found a letter titled Karma and Retribution. It turned out that her stepmother had been planning to secretly claim the insurance payout. But what confused her the most was, if she wanted to keep this from her, Why had she gone to such great lengths to bring her back from the orphanage in the first place? Determined to uncover the truth, she needed a reason to stay in town, and the upcoming midterm exams provided the perfect excuse. But for that, she had to get a good score. However, she fell asleep while reviewing, even leaving her pen on the open textbook. The truth was, her past study methods had relied on stimulant medication to forcefully enhance her focus, but now she had run out of pills. With only 7 days left until the exams, she went to a clinic to get a new prescription. To her frustration, the clinic required a medical checkup before they would prescribe anything, and the cost was an outrageous 240,000 yuan. She tried visiting other clinics, but all of them either demanded checkups or outright refused to sell the medication to a student. Left with no other options, she reached out to some old friends from the orphanage, but they only asked her for money instead of offering help. Running out of time, she turned to the internet, searching for illegal sellers. Just as she found one, the seller immediately asked for a code. Confused, she stared at their profile picture, and then it hit her. She had received a small note box in class a few days ago. Rummaging through her belongings, she found it and flipped it over, revealing a string of numbers on the back. It turned out that the seller had given her this code in advance to verify her identity. She sent the code and requested the medication. The seller responded with a pickup location, instructing her to place the money in a designated warehouse. However, Solji didn't take the pills right away. Instead, she hid nearby, waiting to see who would come to collect the money. To her shock, the person who arrived was none other than Yiri. She asked her to keep this a secret and even offered her a stronger, more effective medication. But Solji wasn't convinced. She chased after her, demanding that she return her money. Before she could figure out the truth about her father, she wasn't willing to accept any favors from her. Solji didn't want to owe Yiri anything, but she made her an offer she couldn't refuse. If she could score first place in the upcoming exam, she would reveal all her secrets to her, everything she wanted to know. To make things more tempting, she even handed her a set of study materials, as if she had prepared them in advance just for her. Faced with such a huge temptation, she had no reason to refuse. The moment she got her hands on the pills, she took them immediately. To her surprise, the effect of this new batch was far stronger than the previous ones. Her first attempt at the exams had ended in failure, but this time, she miraculously ranked first in the entire school. Her classmates looked at her with suspicion. How could someone who couldn't even afford tutoring suddenly surpass them all? Just then, the delinquent who had once offered her a job suddenly appeared. Before coming to Seoul, Solji had secretly collected a stash of pills from her old job, but now she had run out. The delinquent demanded that she repay the cost of the drugs within a week. If not, she would make sure Solji lost her chance to continue her education forever. Broke and desperate, Solji had no idea where to get that kind of money. Before she could figure out a solution, another problem arose. The school had arranged a mandatory medical checkup for the top 20 students. If the test revealed traces of the stimulants she had taken before the exam, would her results be invalidated? As her classmates waited for her downfall, Yuri suddenly sent her a message. She was her last hope. She rushed to the rooftop, where she was already waiting for her. She dropped to her knees, begging her to help her once more, even saying she was willing to sign any kind of settlement agreement. Yuri pulled her up and took out another vial of liquid from her pocket. She had been prepared all along. But what was the real purpose behind her carefully orchestrated plans? Before she could dwell on that, she suddenly woke up to a shocking sight. Her wealthy best friend was stealing from a classmate. Strangely, they didn't take any valuables, only a simple bracelet. Curious, she got up and secretly followed her, but a doctor noticed her and told her to go back to rest. Left with no choice, she returned to the rest area and observed the girl who had lost the bracelet. Determined to uncover the truth, she sent someone to track her best friend. Before long, they reported back. Her friend had been acting strangely, searching for a Samsung phone charger all evening. But she distinctly remembered that they didn't use a Samsung phone. That meant they must have another phone. She immediately ordered her informant to find a way to get their hands on it. That night, she brought Solji to a school event. Her father, who never attended such gatherings, unexpectedly showed up. But it wasn't to see her. Her father was there to meet her best friend. As it turned out, Her father had already bribed them into being her informant at school. Even more shocking, the extra phone they had been searching for all night actually belonged to Solji. It had been confiscated from her. The reason they were so desperate for a charger was that the phone had run out of battery. Meanwhile, the moment her best friend met with her father was captured in secret photos. Seeing this evidence, she could no longer sit still. That phone had to contain something important. Otherwise, why would his best friend go to such lengths to secretly hand it over to her father? But from the photos, she noticed that they weren't holding the phone when they left. That meant the phone had to be somewhere they had just been. She rushed to the storage shed where they had lingered earlier. Right at that moment, a phone started ringing under a table. She quickly found it and answered the call, but there was only silence on the other end. Without hesitation, she ran to the restroom, flipped open Solji's file, and entered the date of Solji's disappearance as the password. To her astonishment, it worked. She had expected to find secrets about Solji, but instead, what she saw shocked her to her core. Her missing sister was in the videos on this phone. Could there be a connection between her disappearance and the death of Solji's father? Determined to uncover the truth, she tracked down the location where the videos had been filmed. It was inside the school. Just as she was about to investigate further, a commotion erupted outside. He rushed to the window and looked down. Solji was being cornered with a knife by another female classmate, being forced back step by step. She was about to rush down to save Solji when, suddenly, someone entered the room and shut the door behind them. The figure slowly walked toward her. When she finally got a clear look at their face, she was struck speechless in shock. It was his long-lost sister. A pair of sisters, one older, one younger. The older sister actually knew all the answers to every test but deliberately got one question wrong so that her younger sister would score higher. Their father was extremely cruel and had set a harsh rule. The child with the higher score had to beat the one with the lower score. One day, the older sister overheard her parents having a heated argument. Worried that her younger sister would hear their harsh words and be hurt, she quickly covered her sister's ears. What she didn't expect was that her parents were actually discussing divorce, both fighting to take custody of the intelligent and gifted younger daughter. Neither was willing to let go of the trophy on the table, and in the struggle, it fell straight onto the older sister's foot. Blood immediately seeped through her white socks. But she knew that if she made a sound because of the pain, her father would hear and it would only cause more trouble. So, she endured the agony and pretended nothing had happened. From that moment on, the young older sister realized that only by taking care of her younger sister could she keep the family together and avoid being abandoned by their parents. As time passed, the two sisters grew up. The younger sister inexplicably started avoiding the older one. A strong sense of crisis surged within the older sister. After thinking it over, she came up with a heartbreaking solution. She prayed to the heavens to fall seriously ill. In her innocent mind, she believed that only if she were gravely ill would her parents and sister truly care about her. Fate seemed to mock her. After her prayer, she was indeed diagnosed with an illness. But after further tests, it turned out to be an unexplained sleep disorder, one that even doctors couldn't pinpoint the cause of. Their father, who valued academic performance above all else, was completely disappointed upon hearing the news. To avoid being further despised by her father, the older sister carefully hid her sleep disorder from him, trying to prove she was still useful, still valuable. But her father remained cold and indifferent, even saying, "Since there's no cause for your illness, you should study even harder." He was convinced that as long as the older sister improved her math scores, she could still rank first in her grade, and under no circumstances could her younger sister surpass her. These pressures weighed on her like a massive stone, keeping her in constant fear and extreme stress. She even began to hallucinate, always feeling as if her father was standing behind her, watching her with a harsh gaze. Her strange behavior caught the attention of her subject teacher, who called her into the office and gently asked why she always seemed distracted in class. Not wanting to discuss the topic, she quickly made up an excuse, took the teacher's treasured university badge. That night, anxious over getting a question wrong on a test, she desperately swallowed a handful of sleeping pills. Perhaps it was the medication, or perhaps the overwhelming stress of the upcoming exams, but she couldn't sleep at all. After hours of torment, she made a reckless decision. Under the cover of a heavy downpour, Taking advantage of the school patrols being more relaxed, she sneaked into the school alone, planning to steal the math test answers. But just as she was about to succeed, the subject teacher suddenly arrived for a routine check and caught her red-handed. Terrified, she immediately dropped to her knees, crying and begging the teacher not to tell her father. She was so desperate that she even said she had no other way out but death. Seeing her pitiful state, the teacher helped her onto the sofa, assuring her that they understood her character and didn't believe she would deliberately break the rules. Perhaps it was because no one had ever shown her kindness for so long, or perhaps because she had lacked her father's love since childhood and was starving for warmth, but in that moment, she suddenly hugged the teacher's neck and pinned them onto the sofa. During their struggle, they accidentally triggered the smartwatch on the teacher's wrist, and its recording function started. Even though she realized this, she was so desperate to obtain the test answers and prove herself to her father that she went through with something she shouldn't have. Later, G discovered the recording and accused her sister, shouting that it was their father who had committed the crime. Panicked, the younger sister rushed to snatch the phone back, leading to a struggle that ended with the phone falling out of the window. One of them ran toward the stairs, while the other, in a moment of reckless desperation, jumped straight out of the window. As one frantically searched for the phone, they were spotted by the school's security patrol. The bright flashlight beams triggered hallucinations, making them believe they were being haunted by a ghost. Terrified, they fled in another direction. Meanwhile, So-hyun was attacked by someone mentally unstable. After some simple first aid, they were taken to a private hospital. At the same time, G-else found the phone. Suddenly, the school's announcement system broadcasted a message. The school event has ended. All students must return to their classrooms immediately. Shortly after, the school gates were locked. No one was allowed to enter or leave. It was obvious that the school wanted to cover up the incident. The murder weapon had been taken by someone with short hair. When injured So-hyun was sent to Jae's father hospital, Ji, filled with rage, climbed over the fence and stormed into the operating room. After all, the older sister had once said, "Father killed the teacher, right?" Unexpectedly, the father, upon seeing his daughter, asked her to suture the student's wound, saying it was a rare practice opportunity. As he spoke, he reminisced about his medical school days, mentioning that first-year students could only practice on pigskin, thick, tough, and frustrating to work with. But in the second year, things changed. There were donated cadavers available for practice. He would never forget the first time he stitched human flesh. The texture was soft yet elastic. After some time, So-hyun regained consciousness. When she went downstairs for some fresh air, she suddenly saw someone directing a group of people to move a large burlap sack. Curious, So-hyun secretly followed. Just then, her phone rang. It was a senior calling. "Have you been in contact with Jae?" She noticed large burlap sack, and when she entered inside, she finds dead body. But before she could respond, the father suddenly snatched the phone away and asked if she wanted to study medicine. So-hyun wanted to leave as soon as possible, but the father blocked her way. Casually, he remarked that the bodies being transported to this room were unidentified, abandoned corpses, no family members to claim them, no one to look for them. To perfect his surgical skills, he practiced on them daily. As he spoke, he suddenly pulled back the sheet covering a corpse. Notably, the deceased wasn't left there randomly. It was Jae who, along with So-hyun, had been drugged with a sedative. The father coldly reminded, "If you want to get into medical school, you can't be afraid of blood, that is, if they could even pass the entrance exams." With that, he pressed a button near the door, finally allowing So-hyun to escape unscathed. Early the next morning, after a video of a knife attack leaked, the police arrived at the school to investigate. However, under a warning glance from the principal, the truth was twisted. The mentally unstable person involved in the case was painted as a jealous, deranged individual who had attacked So-hyun out of resentment. To make matters worse, the mentally unstable person suddenly changed their statement, falsely claiming that So-hyun had given them various pills and promised that taking them would make them feel better. At this point, the wounded So-hyun became the suspect. They desperately tried to explain, but the police produced damning evidence. Surveillance footage from the hospital's pharmacy showing So-hyun standing at the door on the day of their medical examination. At that moment, So-hyun realized it had all been a setup. Ji had orchestrated everything from the beginning. So-hyun finally exposed the real culprit. Soon, news of So-hyun's confession reached the class. However, Ji remained completely unfazed. Surprisingly, it was the gang leader in charge of street deals who planned it. He knew he didn't have Jae's background and connections. If the police really dug into this, he'd be doomed. So that night, he made a move. He tracked down So-hyun. They forced her to return the stolen drug, threatening to expose her if she refused. As the top student at Saiwa Girls High School, she was brilliant at academics. With no other choice, So-hyun had to order a 30-day supply from Jae. The next day, the order was actually accepted. However, So-hyun wasn't sure if the person handling it was Jae or the gang leader in charge of street deals. After school, Jae discovered that all the drugs hidden in the lab were gone. She confronted the mentally unstable person and learned that, fearing police investigation, the gang leader had set a trap. He pretended to agree to sell the drugs to So-hyun but had already tipped off the police. If So-hyun went to the pickup location as planned, they would be caught red-handed. Realizing this, Ji immediately tried to warn So-hyun. But not only did So-hyun refuse to answer the phone, their location showed they were getting closer to the drop-off point. Thinking quickly, Ji tricked her older sister by claiming she needed to borrow phone. She then used the gang leader's phone to change So-hyun's pickup location. This successfully saved So-hyun but exposed her sister in the process. Ji's older sister, without her father's phone, was about to escape when several doctors forcibly pushed her into an ambulance. Their father followed closely behind. Their father had long known that her daughter was stealing and selling drugs to classmates. Now, he seized this opportunity to distance himself from the situation. Coincidentally, a photo of So-hyun wandering around was captured clearly. Along with other unfavorable circumstances, it was easy to blame everything on them. Thanks to his daughter, he could eliminate troublesome people. Years ago, Jae's older sister was terrified. This fear haunted her even during the college entrance exams, where her hands were stained with blood. Her older sister blamed her for failing the exam. No one knew how much she had sacrificed for their father's approval. Months earlier, Jae's older sister had successfully stolen the exam questions from So-hyun's father. Their father knew but did not punish her. Instead, he used this knowledge to blackmail So-hyun's father, who was responsible for setting the exam questions. They struck a deal. Ji's father would help locate his missing daughter, who had been gone for 13 years. In return, he would leak the answers on exam day. This was recorded in Jae's journal. However, part of the journal was torn out, and it was unclear who had removed it. Not long after, So-hyun's father boarded a bus to the exam question preparation site. At that moment, Jae's father sent a text. He had found his missing daughter. This strengthened So-hyun's father's resolve to leak the answers. He hid the answers in a capsule and swallowed it, pretending to be unwell so he would be sent to Jae's father hospital. The plan was to extract the capsule there, ensuring success. Although Jae's older was an exceptionally skilled surgeon, an accident occurred, and So-hyun's father died. But shockingly, the scene shifted to a grand funeral of Jae's older sister organized by Jae's parents. Ji refused to believe and went toward the morgue. So-hyun, noticing this, immediately followed. She revealed that the body wasn't So-hyun's father, it was her sister. They had lived in the same dormitory at the inn. So-hyun found it too much of a coincidence. Surprisingly, Ji listened to So-hyun's analysis and, despite knowing that everything was orchestrated by their father, still wanted to see how things would unfold. Letting him continue committing crimes would actually make it easier for the police to catch him. So, they decided to gather evidence of So-hyun's father's crimes. They split up. Ji sneaked into the surveillance room while So-hyun created a distraction. Meanwhile, So-hyun broke into Jae's father's office. After searching for a while, So-hyun found a disc among the medical records. The cover of the disc was a CT scan of her father taken before he died. Holding the disc, So-hyun became overwhelmed with sorrow and rage. For a moment, she considered killing Jae's father. Luckily, her stepmother stopped her before she could act on her impulse. After the funeral, So-hyun consulted her mother about whether the disc could be used as evidence. However, under South Korean law, a CT scan alone couldn't directly prove that a surgical procedure caused the death. Her mother could only express regret. So-hyun's stepmother took out a blackmail letter and admitted that she had been receiving them continuously since the incident. She speculated that the sender must have known the truth from the very beginning. They decided to find this person and make them testify. Unbeknownst to them, their entire conversation was secretly recorded by the long-haired person. That night, the long-haired person met with a senior contact and exchanged a USB drive for a large number of pills. Shortly after, the senior used the USB drive in another transaction with someone else. That someone else was none other than Jae's father. In reality, everything had been a trap set by So-hyun. So-hyun had predicted that the long-haired person wouldn't pass up the opportunity to make a profit, so during the day, she had deliberately leaked information to Jae. As expected, the long-haired person, after recording the conversation, sold the audio at a high price to Jae's father. Now, Jae's father, who had already gone so far as to fake his daughter's death to cover up his crimes, would definitely panic upon learning that new evidence had surfaced. Next, So-hyun needed Jae's help. So-hyun planned to make it seem like he was searching for the surgery footage inside the hospital and needed to ensure Jae's father noticed. If Jae's father had a guilty conscience, he would rush to clean up the evidence before anyone else could. Meanwhile, Jae installed listening devices all over their house. Meanwhile, Sol-ji waited anxiously outside Jae's mother's house for 3 hours. In contrast, Hwai remained calm, as if nothing was amiss. At the same time, in the courtroom for Sol-ji's father's murder case, the short-haired woman called for a new witness, one who had been the sole observer of the surgical procedure. Surprisingly, his father showed no sign of concern upon hearing this and even reassured his lawyer that nothing unexpected would happen. In a twist, Hwai's mother led 2 people to an unexpected location, a welfare home. The atmosphere was tense, as if something significant was about to unfold. While emotions ran high, Hwai's mindset was shifting. Until this moment, Sol-ji had firmly believed in Goi, but her stepmother reminded her that Goi's father had appeared unerringly confident in court, as if he had already secured victory. His ability to counter every new piece of evidence with ease suggested he had long anticipated the accusations. Even upon hearing that Goi had been identified as a key witness, he seemed unfazed, reassuring his lawyer that there was no way she could testify. At this point, Sol-ji's inner convictions began to waver. Meanwhile, Hwai's father took her to an undisclosed location. There, he handed his daughter a phone, playing a video that revealed surveillance footage of Sol-ji and her stepmother inside a car. The footage raised a critical question. If obtaining the exam questions was all that mattered, why had Goi's older sister been taken into the operating room in the first place? An unexpected crisis struck. The front left tire of Sol-ji's stepmother's car suddenly burst, narrowly avoiding a collision by swerving into another vehicle. The near accident sent a shock through Goi, who had been watching the scene unfold. Before she could even react, her father turned to her and asked a chilling question. "Do you want to know why your sister was in the operating room that day?" Jae's father took her to a secluded villa. Inside, locked away, was none other than Jae's older sister, the daughter he had gone to great lengths to fake the death of. Around Jae's older sister's ankle was an electronic tracking device. Thinking her sister was being held captive, Jae grabbed her hand and tried to run. But the moment they reached the door, a deafening alarm blared. Jae's older sister suddenly reacted violently, as if triggered by something deep within her mind. She screamed uncontrollably and ran back into the room, frantically resisting any attempt to take her away. Only then did Jae's father finally break his silence. The real murderer was not Jae, it was Jae's older sister. It turned out that Jae's older sister, combined with the long-term influence of Jae's father's strict education, once she obtained the exam questions, she believed she couldn't let her shameful secret be exposed. So, she injected a heart-paralyzing poison into the foredrip. By the time Jae's father arrived at the operating room, it was already too late. However, Jae refused to believe her father's words. Seeing through her hesitation, her father pointed out that she wasn't unwilling to believe him. He admitted that he no longer wanted to cover for his eldest daughter. But despite his failure as a father, he had tried his best. He didn't want to acknowledge his own mistakes. The next day, he didn't show up to school. So-hyun, worried, asked the teacher about her absence and learned that she had taken a leave due to illness. Concerned, she searched for her after school, revisiting all the places filled with their memories, but she was nowhere to be found. Finally, she remembered the tutoring room at the hospital where she used to study. Sure enough, she found her there. So-hyun stood at a distance, waiting for an explanation. But Ji seemed like a different person. She no longer wanted to be close to her. Only after his desperate pleas did she reluctantly agree to talk, finally revealing the truth. So-hyun's father, a member of the exam committee, had died on her father's operating table. Coincidentally, Jae's brilliant older sister had gone missing around the same time. To make things even stranger, the leaked test questions from the tutoring center matched exactly what Jae's older sister had written in her notes. So-hyun's father had traded the exam questions in exchange for getting his daughter transferred to the high school. Ji kept So-hyun by her side, using her as proof of her father's mistakes. To her, it was an entertaining game. But, just as So-hyun expected, Ji appeared to be indifferent, but in reality, she had another plan to expose her father. A few days later, So-hyun met with his senior and bluntly told him that she wouldn't make much money just by selling microphones. Instead, there was a much bigger opportunity, if he had the guts to take it. Using a bit of reverse psychology, So-hyun ignited his senior's greed. Without hesitation, he confessed that Jae had sold the college entrance exam questions at an exorbitant price to VIP clients, which included high-ranking politicians, business tycoons, and influential figures. Hearing this, his senior was thrilled and eagerly agreed to join the scheme. That very night, they collected advance payments from many parents. Finally, the day of the test arrived. As planned, the informant faked an injury. While receiving treatment, he discreetly slipped the exam questions into the nurse's pocket. However, at the last moment, the nurse unexpectedly turned on the plan. She grabbed a scalpel and stabbed him in the leg, then quickly lied to the supervisor, claiming that the patient had a rare blood condition and needed immediate bloodletting. Coincidentally, he had a rare blood type. If they didn't rush him to the hospital immediately, the patient's muscles and nerves would completely deteriorate. The exam proctors, unwilling to bear such a responsibility, seizing the opportunity while the blood transfusion was underway, she swiftly completed the necessary task, believing she had done so undetected. However, she was unaware that So-hyun and his senior had hijacked the ambulance. At that moment, Ji suddenly appeared, pleading with So-hyun to release her father. But having risked so much, So-hyun's senior refused to let the money slip away. Tension built between the two sides, reaching a deadlock. Then, in a shocking move, So-hyun grabbed the exam papers and swallowed them whole. Jae simply muttered, "I'm sorry," before injecting her with a muscle relaxant. The scene shifted. So-hyun's senior forced Ji to retrieve the questions from So-hyun's stomach, warning that if she didn't, the wealthy parents who had bought the exam answers would have him killed. Just then, her father, seemingly by accident, locked eyes with her, reminding her that So-hyun was her friend. Understanding the message, Jae agreed to perform the emergency surgery. But eventually, Ji successfully extracted the exam questions. As So-hyun's senior rushed out to deliver them, Ji turned to her father and asked if her sister had also been forced into this situation. Her father remained silent. Instead of answering, he tossed a red and white capsule onto the hospital bed. Inside was the real set of exam questions. In the next scene, Ji achieved the nation's only perfect score using the stolen test. When the television station interviewed her father about his successful parenting methods, standing before a live audience of tens of thousands, she held on to her sister and, without hesitation, jumped off a bridge in an apparent suicide. As the scandal grew, a leaked video exposed how her family had obtained the exam questions through surgery, causing public attention to shift toward the suspicious death of So-hyun's father. And Jae's father was finally arrested. Yet, when faced with a barrage of reporters' questions, he remained firm, stating that no matter what, he had to find his missing younger daughter. 6 months later, due to a lack of sufficient murder evidence, he was released from prison. Every day, he wandered near So-hyun's home, searching for something, and with that, the story came to an end. Thank you for your support and for following this journey.